The world, especially the Western world, is in evident need of a new Gnosis, even of a new Gnosticism. Fascinating and inspiring though it is, the old Gnosticism of 1700 years ago labors under some obvious limitations when its applicability to contemporary spiritual problems is considered. Yet, at the same time, it must be evident to any unprejudiced student of Gnosticism that it still has much to offer to contemporary humanity when it is stripped of certain archaic and outdated historical features. It is because of these features that it appears imperative that Gnosticism should not be confined to the limited interests of a backward-looking antiquarianism. Some way must be found to rescue ancient Gnosticism from the ivory towers of those who delight more in the subtleties of Coptic and Greek phrases than in the living realities of the soul, to which the ancient Gnostics were in fact addressing themselves. It appears to us that such a way can be found, and that it must of necessity be composed of two main sources. The first of these sources is the classical Gnosticism of the early centuries AD, with the addition of significant amplifications brought forth by the various manifestations of the Gnostic impulse within the Pan-Sophic tradition. The second element is none other than the Gnosis formulated by Jung. It may be considered likely that self-declared purists of both the Jungian and of the Gnostic variety will resist the marriage of these two elements. Resistances and objections of such a nature, however, ought to be viewed as of little importance when contrasted with the potential benefits to be derived from a creative conjunction of ancient Gnosticism and the modern Gnosis of Jung. Assuredly, there may be persons who wish to confine the wisdom of Jung to the small operational arena of the consulting room, even as there will be others who will insist on locking up Gnosticism in the files of scholarly specialists and in their costly and obscure academic treatises. The fact remains that Jungian depth psychology is more than a therapeutic discipline, just as Gnosticism is more than an ancient religion. Both are the expression at their particular levels of existential reality of a gnosis, a knowledge of the heart directed toward the inmost core of the human psyche and having as its objective the essential transformation of the psyche. It becomes necessary for us now to give some expression to the model of reality as it appears within the texts of the ancient Gnostics, and as it may be usefully amplified by the modern statement of gnosis offered to us by Jung. Gnosis is formless, since ultimate reality is always beyond conceptual grasp. It was precisely this perception of ultimate reality that inspired the teachers and writers of ancient Gnosticism, that fired them to amazing heights of original, creative accomplishment in the spiritual field. Modern psychology and ancient Gnosticism are but pointers to truth that are actually encountered in the vital experience of personal psychic transformation. Experience itself is always individual and can never be adequately expressed or interpreted by arranging sets of concepts and doctrines, for concepts are only indications of similarities within experience. Gnostic and psychologist must both be on their guard against the danger that they might mistake formula for wisdom, and thus fall into the same dark pit into which theology plunged headlong and fatally. If anyone should expect Jung to have constructed a new Gnostic system in the accustomed sense of the word, such an expectation would assuredly meet with disappointment. Jung, in fact, pointed the way toward a most important feature of the new Gnosticism when he said that where individual development is demanded, all methods must be abandoned. He considered individuality as unique, unpredictable, and uninterpretable. In his view, all human beings are pathfinders, hewing their way through a dense forest. The established systems and forms of knowledge can do no more than put up signposts and indicate the explored roads that lead to the edge of this forest where the task of solitary exploration begins. Thus, religious and quasi-religious disciplines as well as modern psychology can point to significant common situations in the quest after gnosis, but they are in reality only a shorthand of the language of the soul to be abandoned as real contact with the deeper layers of spirit is achieved. The danger of all systems is that they tend to mistake the words which serve as pointers for the realities to which they point. We may use terms of a Gnostic derivation such as Sophia or Abraxas, or on the other hand, we may employ psychological terms such as anima, animus, and shadow, but in all instances we must be extremely careful that we do not mark them as known because named, thus depriving ourselves of authentic gnosis. Life is never static, and the inner life least of all, so it would be improper to refer to any definable gnosis or individuation as a final achievement. We are ever becoming, but we never become. All systems must beware of assuming that they are making true statements about reality. When they come to rationalize their systems and begin to look upon them as truths, they will soon be fossilizing their insights and thus soon destroy their empirical value as signposts on the way. At the portal of true gnosis, all isms and even Gnosticism must vanish. Similarly, the psychologist must be willing to sacrifice his allegiance to a psychological system when he begins to deal with true individuation. It is interesting to note in this connection that Jung was quite critical of the representatives of the Pansophic tradition within the modern era, precisely because of their frequent tendency to mistake their own symbols for factual and philosophical truth. Most of his derogatory remarks made about theosophy and related systems must be interpreted in this light. Modern occultists, for the most part, even if thus inclined, could not give expression to their symbolic models of reality in psychological language. Jung, on the other hand, seriously questioned the usefulness of metaphysical formulations such as theirs. His endeavor was to bring everything purporting to be metaphysical into what he called the daylight of psychological understanding, which he felt was vastly preferable to the use of nebulous power words of academic metaphysicians and occultists. Jung, in turn, had been criticized for this approach by persons attached to the mainstream religions, as well as by some esotericists, notably by the school of René Guénon and Friedrich Schuon in recent years. And the charge of psychologism was made against him for his attempt to express religious and metaphysical statements in psychological terms only. Yet it is fairly apparent that Jung acted as a Gnostic in this respect also. To name is not to know. The Church has substituted faith for knowing, and some metaphysicians, as well as many esotericists, have come to regard speculation and elaborate systemizations of terminology as substitutes for knowing directly for oneself. To know, one must experience. This, as far as we can discern from the now increasingly available Gnostic documents, was exactly the position of the ancient Gnostics, for which reason they were held in disrepute by churchly believers and philosophical speculators alike. The occultists who use elaborate diagrams of astral planes and etheric bodies liberally sprinkled with Sanskrit words can be as far from gnosis as can the psychologist who employs clever two-dimensional maps of the psyche with shorthand expressions such as the shadow, the anima, or the wise old man, as though these were concrete realities instead of symbolic pointers to incomprehensible mysteries in the vast recesses of the unconscious. If we cannot expect a system of the conventional sort to represent the gnosis which emerges from the conjunction of the approaches of the ancient Gnostics and of Jung, it may be at least possible for us to state certain basic axioms which could serve as the principal indicators of the message of this gnosis. In the following we shall represent a brief summary of these elements in the hope that they may state in the briefest outline form the basic propositions around which all other elements of the new Gnostic reality model may constellate themselves. Some of the points here enumerated are based on similar summary by the late Eleanor Bertine in her work Jung's Contribution to Our Time, in which she outlines basic conclusions of Jung concerning the religious side of the psyche.